Folks, I have heard a lot of things I don't want to hear in this election cycle, but descriptions of Palmer's genitalia is way up there. It's Monday, October 21st. I'm Jane Coaston, and this is What a Day, the show where, well, here we are.
Mr. Trump, what's your favorite thing to order at McDonald's?
I like it all. I like every ounce of it, everything. But I do like the French fries where I'll be working.
I hope Trump had fun playing job. On today's show, Israel ramps up attacks in Lebanon again. Plus, Russell Brand is selling a magical necklace. Yes, I am being serious. But first, in-person early voting kicked off this weekend in Nevada. And I'm sure I've told you this before, but it's one of the key swing states that will decide the upcoming election. And like all the other major battlegrounds, polling averages show the race there between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump is a statistical dead heat. Of course it is. Anyway, to get voters excited, the Harris campaign deployed one of its most popular messengers to stump for the vice president in Las Vegas on Saturday.
Hello, Vegas! Are you fired up? You ready to go?
Former President Barack Obama spoke to a crowd of about 4,000. In a state dominated by the tourism industry, voters in Nevada named the economy and the cost of living as their top issues this election. And Obama acknowledged that, yeah, a lot of Nevadans are struggling right now. But he said voting for Trump isn't going to fix those problems.
So I get why people are looking to shake things up. It's understandable. I understand it. What I cannot understand is why anybody would think that Donald Trump will shake things up in a way that is good for you. Because there's absolutely no evidence that this man thinks about anybody but himself.
Well, we now know he does think about the late golfer Arnold Palmer, or parts of Arnold Palmer, but more on that later. 4 years ago, President Joe Biden won Nevada's 6 electoral votes by about 2.5 points, roughly the same margin Hillary Clinton did in 2016. But Nevada is also a state where Republicans could be chipping away at the Democratic Party's historical advantage with 2 major voting blocs, Union voters and Latino voters. Last week, we talked about how recent polls show Harris underperforming Biden's edge with Latino voters. And in a state like Nevada, where 30% of the population is Latino or Hispanic, they'll be key to deciding which way the state ultimately goes in the election. So, for more on where things stand in Nevada, I spoke with Manuel Santamaria. He's the Nevada State Director for Mi Familia Vota, a nonprofit that works to mobilize Latino voters. Manuel, thanks for coming on What a Day.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about Mi Familia Vota and your work, particularly how it differs and changes during an upcoming election?
Yeah, so Mi Familia Vota is concerned with expanding the Latino electorate right through the vote at the ballot. We also fund and build local infrastructure here so that we can push our community's agendas forward, right? What's important to the Latino community. What's different in an electoral cycle where there are other ones is off years, we worry about things like citizenship work, right? Helping people navigate that process. And then any legislative priorities here locally, at least in Nevada, where I'm at, where Latinos concern themselves. And then during cycle, obviously, then we're trying to build that Latino electorate and expand it as much as possible.
When you're doing door knocking or you're talking to people, what are you hearing on the ground about this election from folks?
For a lot of them, it's the first time that they've heard anything from, somebody trying to get them out to go vote or to check on their voter registration, because a lot of them, again, they're considered unreachable, right? And so they kind of exist outside of those normal contact kind of things that campaigns do. So a lot of them are just grateful that someone's reached out to them and reminded them. But most of the, again, economic anxiety and just wondering, hey, what are they doing for me this time?
What are the main challenges to convincing unregistered Spanish-speaking citizens to vote?
Trust is a big one, right? You're asking them to fill out a form that is going to be sent to the state, that even if it's in Spanish or in English, right? They may see that as like, well, are you keeping tabs on me for other purposes and things like that. So that's one of the big things, really.
Do you think that in some part that comes from some folks having, like, I know that having been through the immigration process myself, some people are just very nervous about having to have interactions with the state?
Yeah, like when you're going through the process, right? You have to keep them updated on where you're moving to, where you're living.
Yep.
So afterwards, I feel like they kind of feel like, well, I'm free, right? I'm an American now. So why are you still keeping tabs on me, or why do you need this information? I thought that was the whole point of coming here.
Right. What do you say to those voters? How do you get them to say, like, yes, obviously this involves sending a form to the government, but this matters to you and your family? How do you have that conversation?
So a lot of it is our org itself, right? You trust who we are because we are there for you during off times, right? It's not just, we're not just showing up for the first time. It's not the first time you've heard from us. We've helped you in the past. So we're trusted messengers in the community. And so through that, we kind of explain like, hey, we're not doing this. We're not collecting that data ourselves and keeping it and marking you as where you're at. Maybe if we can make phone calls later, sure, but not for any other reason than that. And then making sure that they understand that this is just going to the Secretary of State here locally, and they're going to ask you to update it next time you want to vote as well.
What are some of the issues that Latino voters in Nevada are telling you that they care about most this election?
So Latino voters in Nevada are concerned with everything that regular Americans are concerned with, right?
Yeah.
The economy, housing, the cost of goods, all those things that are affecting Americans all over the nation. In a place like Nevada that's very heavily centric on tourism, right? It's almost magnified here. If you're a Latino, you work in the service industry and people aren't coming here and spending as much money, that affects you directly.
Yeah. And on that point, both Trump and Harris have come out in support of ending taxes on tips, a policy that might resonate with folks who are working in the service industry in Nevada. Is that shared policy goal making it any harder to convince some voters to support the Democratic ticket?
There are two dueling policies out now, right? Kamala Harris introduced hers. Donald Trump had come out first and done this no tax on tips thing. There are very marked differences in them, and really getting through the misinformation on what it would actually be. One of them was very much, hey, we're just not going to tax your tips. But the Harris proposal was more in depth about, well, you still have to declare them, right? Because you need to declare this if you want to get a mortgage so you can prove to a bank that you're making this income, right? It's great if you don't want to get it taxed and you don't want to declare it. But if you're just making all this money under the table, you can't prove to anybody what money you're making.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So recent polling from the New York Times and Siena College found that Latinos nationwide are supporting Vice President Harris over Donald Trump by about a 19-point margin. But that's down from 26 points in 2020 and 39 points in 2016. What do you think explains some of that shift right among some Latino voters?
I don't want to push back, but I do want to say I haven't noticed a rightward shift. I've more noticed like an apathetic type shift, right? So a drop in interest. And a lot of it, again, comes from just the fact that Latinos, a lot of them being blue collar workers, are just struggling, with the economy and everything like that. So if you're a shift worker on the Strip, for example, and you work 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., you're not watching the news normally. You're not listening to the news. Hard to contact you. So you would mark that as a drop in interest or as someone that's not supporting, right? You can't get a hold of it.
What do you think the Harris campaign needs to do in the next few weeks in order to strengthen support among Latinos in Nevada?
They've been doing a great job in outreach this cycle. Here in Nevada especially, they've hired a lot of young Latinos that are first gen that have gone through this experience of, of everything that Americans are going through now. So continuing that outreach and also just emphasizing the policy suggestions that the Harris administration would put in that would help Latinos, overcome these economic anxieties, right? The messaging around that, and really just not overpromising, just keeping it light and saying like, hey, we're here, we hear you, we support you.
Manuel, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll get to some of the news in a moment, but if you like the show, make sure to subscribe, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and share with your friends. And now, the news.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Pennsylvania. We love Pennsylvania.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump were in overdrive over the last few days on the campaign trail. with a focus on battleground states. On Saturday, Harris held campaign events with pop stars Lizzo in Michigan and Usher in Georgia. Trump campaigned in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, the birthplace of famous golfer Arnold Palmer. Trump began his speech by waxing rhapsodic about Palmer for over 12 minutes, including this interesting anecdote.
I love women, but this is a guy that was all man. This man was strong and tough, and I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable. I had to say it.
Folks, I have heard a lot of things I don't want to hear in this election cycle, but descriptions of Palmer's genitalia is way up there. Trump also had some harsh words about Kamala Harris.
So you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've had enough, that you just can't take it anymore. We can't stand you. You're a shit vice president. The worst.
Now, I could go into a historical discussion of past vice presidents and say that actually Andrew Johnson was the worst vice president. But I will actually center on Trump using shit as an adjective. Not shitty, but shit. Trump, you've been spending way too much time with English people. Tell Nigel Farage to knock it off. Harris fired off a couple of zingers of her own. While she and Trump held competing rallies in Wisconsin on Thursday, she responded to hecklers in her crowd.
Oh, you guys are at the wrong rally. No, I think you meant to go to the smaller one down the street.
And on Sunday, both Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, went to church. In Michigan, Walz slammed Trump over his $59 branded Trump Bibles, which are made in China, of course. And Harris spoke at a church in Georgia, where she drew a sharp contrast between the values of the two presidential campaigns.
Our country is at a crossroads, and where we go from here is up to us, as Americans and as people of faith. And now we ask a question. We face this question. What kind of country do we want to live in? A country of chaos, fear, and hate, or a country of freedom, compassion, and justice?
And the congregation sang happy birthday to the vice president, who turned 60 on Sunday. Meanwhile, Ohio Senator and Trump running mate J.D. Vance campaigned with tailgaters at the Green Bay Packers game, and Trump was in Pennsylvania, where he pretended to work a shift at McDonald's. A McDonald's that was, to be clear, closed. They even rehearsed. No, seriously, that actually happened. Palestinian health officials say nearly 90 people are either dead or missing after an Israeli airstrike hit a residential building in northern Gaza late Saturday. Dozens more were wounded. Israeli officials initially disputed the death toll, but said they were examining what had happened. A day earlier, an Israeli strike killed another 33 people in a refugee camp in northern Gaza. And on Sunday, Israel's military said it had targeted a, quote, large number of economic targets tied to the Lebanese group Hezbollah near Beirut. It came after Hezbollah sent dozens of projectiles into Israel over the weekend, including one that targeted a home owned by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Taken together, the Israeli strikes are the latest indication it has no immediate plans to wind down its wars against both Hezbollah and Gaza's Hamas, despite the killing of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar last week and renewed international hopes for a ceasefire.
Muy fuerte, muy fuerte. Muy fuerte. Esto está en decadencia. Y cada vez más apagones, más apagones. Imagínese usted.
Cuba suffered its worst blackout in 3 decades after one of the island's major power plants failed over the weekend. The entire island went dark Friday morning, leaving millions of people without electricity. And just as power was restored to some regions, the power went out again on Saturday morning. Power outages are common in Cuba, but they're usually limited to a few hours a day. Experts have long warned that the island could suffer a major outage because Cuba's power grid relies on power plants that are more than half a century old. One Cuba resident told MSNBC on Friday that the island's power grid is, quote, on the verge of total collapse.
Esto está ya a punto del colapso entero.
Energy officials restored power in some parts of the island's capital of Havana on Saturday, but much of the island was still in the dark on Sunday. The latest hurricane brewing in the Atlantic, Oscar, made landfall in the Bahamas on Sunday, and later that night in Cuba as a Category 1 storm. Around 200,000 letter carriers have agreed to a tentative contract with the United States Postal Service. Their previous contract expired in May of 2023, and the new contract goes through November, just long enough to make sure that continuing negotiations don't affect the election. The new deal includes higher pay and a promise from the USPS to make every effort to put air conditioning in existing mail trucks. The USPS is also in the process of rolling out a new fleet of vehicles complete with air conditioning. The contract still needs to be ratified by union members, which could take several weeks. Both sides have said they're happy with the agreement, though neither got everything they wanted. Hooray, compromise! And that's the news. One more thing. We are in a golden age of grifters, scammers, conners, whatever you call them, we've got way too many of them. Take, for example, Russell Brand. You might remember him as an actor and generally famous person from the early to mid-2000s. Well, since then, he's been credibly accused of sexual assault multiple times. Now he's a podcaster, a convert to Christianity, and sadly, one of those guys on YouTube who yells about how they don't want you to know about their globalist agenda. Sometimes he discusses this with Tucker Carlson. Obviously, earlier this year, he endorsed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president, the candidate for people who spend a lot of time asking on TikTok why there are so many dangerous chemicals in our food and water, and then vote for the people who help put the dangerous chemicals in our food and water. Anyway, Brand hit TikTok this week with a new ad for an amulet that promises to block Wi-Fi from corrupting you. I am not joking. Take a listen.
And as you know, airports are places full of Wi-Fi and all sorts of evil energies. Think of all the phones out there, all of the signals, corruptible and corrupting. Luckily, I wear this magical amulet from AirTech that keeps me safe from all of the various signals out there. You should get one as well.
So, a couple of things. 1. Russell Brand reminds me of a streetwise rat from a children's movie that I kind of forgot about. 2. This amulet costs $217.36 in American dollars. It will not block Wi-Fi. You don't need to block Wi-Fi. And despite what the amulet's website says, it will also not help heal your wounds. It will not do anything except cost you, a nice person, 4 times as much as a Southwest flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco. I am not talking about Russell Brand because he's interesting. He isn't. But what he is a grifter. He's following the grifter's path. Step 1, convince an audience that they literally cannot trust anyone or anything except the grifter for some reason. Step 2, scare your audience. Step 3, sell your audience things they don't need because of the things you scared them about because they trust you. Russell Brand isn't worried about Wi-Fi corrupting his vital forces. And Alex Jones doesn't actually believe the New World Order is coming to steal your mind. In fact, we know this for certain, because back in 2017, Alex Jones's attorney told a courtroom that his whole conspiratorial thing was, quote, performance art, and that he was simply, quote, playing a character. But there are people out there, people whom you may even know and love and care about, who do believe people like Brand and Jones and Donald Trump, the grifter of grifters. Someone, right now, who is about to purchase a $200 hunk of plastic because Russell Brand told them they could stop Wi-Fi from hurting them. Before we go, it's been a wild ride for Empire City, the untold origin story of the NYPD. We've dived into the militarization of the force, the policing of abortion in the early days of New York, and the very first investigation into police corruption. But as NYPD news continues to break, we know there's so much more to uncover. The series finale of Empire City dropped today, so make sure to follow Empire City wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes now and enjoy ad-free listening by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. That's all for today. If you like the show, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, don't buy anything Russell Brand tells you to, and tell your friends to listen. And if you're into reading, and not just thinking about how Donald Trump pretends to be a working-class hero, but he actually hates paying overtime and would not answer any questions on raising the minimum wage and will fire striking workers, like me, What A Day is also a nightly newsletter. Check it out and subscribe at crooked.com/subscribe. I'm Jane Coaston, and I am not loving it, Donald. Not at all.